Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. So, before we get into today's episode, I have a question for you. What would it be like if you could take a cocktail every morning that could dramatically reduce your risk of heart disease, obesity, diabetes, neurological disease, cancer, and simultaneously boost your mood, your resilience, and your energy levels? Well, for the last 2 years, I have, with the help of many of my friends, colleagues, experts in nutrition and nutritional supplements, been formulating 4 absolutely cutting edge, breakthrough, incredibly powerful supplements for 4 main things. And those things are: one, Energenesis is the most powerful mitochondrial enhancing supplement on the market for long-term energy production. Ultra Brain is the most powerful natural nootropic supplement for brain performance, cognitive performance, as well as mood optimization and long-term brain health simultaneously. We've got Immune Genesis, our latest supplement, which is all about, of course, supercharging immune function, which everybody wants to do right now. And we've got Energy Essentials and Superfoods, which is a comprehensive, ultra premium multivitamin and multimineral with all of the best forms of those vitamins and minerals, not the cheapy stuff that you find in common multivitamin and mineral supplements. And it's got a ton of amazing superfoods with proven metabolic benefits, things like spirulina, chlorella, pomegranate, and many, many others. So these are, within their respective 4 categories, bar none, the best supplements in those categories. And if you compare the dosages and the ingredients used to any other supplements within those categories, you will absolutely see that for yourself. And I encourage you to do that. So anyway, this is to let you know about those 4 supplements. If you don't already know about them, head over to store.theenergyblueprint.com and go check out the ingredients. We've put together pages with all of the ingredients, with all of the research on all of those ingredients. These are not just typical, sales pages with a lot of hype and claims. We're just showing you the actual research behind all of these ingredients that are in these formulations. They are incredibly powerful. We get incredible testimonials virtually every day from people using these supplements. And for many people, they're absolutely life-changing. So go check them out, get on these supplements. Like I said, this is a cocktail that you can use. And there's proven science to show that this cocktail can dramatically reduce your risk of numerous diseases while simultaneously boosting your mood and energy levels in a hugely powerful way. So go check it out, store.theenergyblueprint.com. Hey there, this is Ari. Welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I am very excited for today's guest. He's a personal friend of mine, and he's someone that I personally spend a lot of time actually following his posts on social media on a pretty much a daily basis. And he has, I would say, over the last year, done one of the best jobs of anybody that I know personally in continually following science around everything that's going on with the pandemic and rigorously evaluating information and posting about it in a very, very nuanced, very deeply scientific way. And I'm just very, very impressed with him as a thinker. And I'm very excited to introduce you all to him. His name is Dr. Daniel Chang, and he's been practicing as a licensed naturopathic physician in Portland, Oregon since 2000. He looks, by the way, I thought he was like maybe 29 or early 30s or something. And I couldn't believe what I saw recently that he's been practicing as a naturopathic physician for over 20 years. I was like, what did he get started at age 12 or something? Doogie Howser. But his passion in life is to inspire and empower people towards taking control of their health by reconnecting with nature on various levels. His newest means for doing so is the Vital Human Health Hub. It's a lot of H's. Human Health Hub, a new home base for all of his efforts to curate and disseminate high quality health information. Learn more at vital-human.com. He's also the co-founder of the Healing Earth Health Conference, which is found at earthheal.org, which is, by the way, happening in a few days, weeks. When is that coming? When is that happening, Dr. Chang?
It's April 24th. Please call me Daniel. But yeah, it's April 24th, and getting excited about it.
Awesome.
Thanks for the kind words.
Yeah, my pleasure. I meant it. So that is going to be probably literally within a few days of us releasing this episode.
Yeah.
So for everyone listening, make sure you go to earthheal.org, sign up for it. Daniel, it's free, right?
Sadly, it's not. It's we got to pay these. These are some high level speakers we got here, so we do have to pay some pretty significant honorariums. So we do have to charge. It's about, I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 or $90 for a full day conference, and it's also
it's
partially direct. No, it's online, but it's also a continuing education for physicians. Wow. It's meant for, physicians and what I like to call the informed lay people who really want to, dive into more details about things.
Awesome.
So yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about what this conference is all about. And I know you have some pretty epic speakers. I'm very excited about David Katz, who I've had on the podcast before, and Vandana Shiva, who is
honestly, still pinching myself about Dr. Shiva. She's just got to be one of my most favorite people in the world. And anybody who doesn't know her, I mean, it's almost impossible to try to relay everything that she's doing and everything that she's about. But she is an activist in the truest sense, and just intent on keeping things on this planet the way they should be in terms of nature and how it should be treated and how we should be working with it rather than in spite of it, and working with it rather than just using it for our own, to satisfy all the things that we humans want out of this life. So she's just an incredible inspiration, and she's our keynote speaker. And she just came out with a new book that I love the title of, called Oneness versus the 1%, mm-hmm. Where she really dives into what's going on out there in the world of, Bill. She's an outspoken opponent of the way that Bill Gates is going around trying to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish for this planet. And she's undoubtedly going to speak a lot about that. And she's super informed about it. She's investigated him for years and knows all the fine details about what he's doing, especially in the realm of farming and seed patenting and all of these just incredibly concerning things. So she's going to be hammering some stuff that I think should be really interesting for the average person to hear who probably doesn't know a lot about it.
Yeah. I didn't know of her until relatively recently, I'd say the last year. And I've watched maybe close to 10 podcasts with her, various interviews with her. And she has quickly become one of my favorite people on the planet right now.
It's hard not to.
Yeah. And she knows more about she knows more about Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation and those efforts and the ins and outs and the specifics of them and financial ties to who and the result of their various experiments than I think just about anybody that I've seen, as far as chronicling the actual what they're doing and what the results and what the side effects are. Since you brought that up, this is, among this territory of controversial topics, which there are a long list of now, and it seems to be increasing on a daily basis, of highly controversial, highly politicized, almost taboo, polarized topics. Vaccines probably being the pinnacle of those. But Bill Gates is also one of those. And we have these different takes on Bill Gates, everything from one extreme of, he's some kind of evil Satan worshiping pedophile, cultist who's doing all kinds of, who's just this evil maniacal psychopath who's out to get us, to on the other end, to the extreme of he is just this wonderfully benevolent, altruistic guy who's just trying to help the world in every way possible. And I personally am probably smack dab in the center of that. I don't claim to know his inner motivations, but I definitely have a big problem with a lot of the things that he's doing and what the results are, and I think are going to be, of those efforts. The latest one being the efforts to spray particulate in the atmosphere, to dim the sun, to try to combat global warming. I mean, it's hard to imagine somebody having the scientific hubris to tinker with the climate of the whole planet in a way that is fundamentally not about addressing root causes. Obviously, the sun is not the cause of global warming. And that sort of tinkering, to me, not only represents just the pinnacle of hubris, but also just something that is incredibly dangerous and has almost unimaginable potential for consequences in so many different ways. And if I can maybe frame this conversation, you mentioned something a little while ago, sort of kind of the paradigm of understanding that certain people are operating kind of opposed to nature. And I think a really good way of understanding this is fundamentally there are different philosophies, and there are actually different types of science that can be done. Some people do science with respect for nature, where we are seeking to work with and optimize nature. And other people do science, I would say the majority of big corporations, pharmaceutical companies, big agriculture, and those are the companies that, for example, the Gates Foundations is aligned with. And the underlying paradigms behind almost all of the quote unquote science that gets done is at odds with nature, is in somewhat of a battle with nature. And I know that you've talked a lot about that in your posts, but can you kind of tell us about your thoughts on things? That's how I perceive it, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's a obviously huge topic. And I think the most fascinating thing to me in general is how much overlap there is between that, really everything that we see going on these days in the realm of vaccines, and certainly, everything that Gates is doing. I'm sure you just heard that he's now the largest landowner in the United States, farmland owner in the United States. I don't know a ton about what he's doing in the atmosphere, but I do know that that's, and I don't like to say he's not doing it. He's just supporting these efforts financially. But there's such a fascinating amount of overlap between these things. And yet it makes perfect sense to me if you consider the fact that it's really the same viewpoint and approach to things, just being applied in different fields. And so I know of those things. I know that the health field the most, and it doesn't take a lot of effort to look at the way that the conventional medical system approaches chronic health issues, and how, essentially we wait for a disaster to happen, and then we try to science our way out of it, or technology our way out of it, using methods that don't, like you just said, address the root cause. And the same things are happening with things that are occurring in our environment. Everything from species demise to climate change to the loss of our soil, the loss of our water, et cetera. It's all disasters that are starting to become too significant to not pay attention to, kind of like a heart attack or chest pain, or a weird mass growing on the side of your leg or something like that, where it's like, okay, we got to do something about this. So what should we do? We should try to burn it, cut it out, drug it with some super high powered, technologically advanced drug and not look at why those things are happening. And, you know, and there's certainly no harm in making money from those efforts as well. And so to me, it's a very, very clear, definitive problem with the way that we are approaching things in general, which is, I just always put it working in spite of nature rather than with nature. And to me, I have not seen evidence yet in anything I've looked at that is a sustainable approach to life. Nature will win every time, one way or another. And so that, you know, honestly, that's, you could say, is at the base of what inspires my effort, is just a real definitive trust in the wisdom inherent in nature, and you know, the billions and billions of years that have led to what this world is like these days, and our speck of time that we've been here. And when I see things that are in opposition to what we know is how things really should work, and you know, I get very concerned with that, and all the way down to the level of just my own children and what's potentially going to impact their health and their well-being.
Yeah. And
then all the way out to humanity and all the other amazing earthlings that we share this planet with. So yeah, that's what I do.
So I almost see, you know, people, it's common now to hear people refer to the science, right? That I follow the science. You know, kind of following what we were just talking about, I almost see a semantic problem here with how we use the word science. I mean, we could go multiple routes with that, but in particular, given that there are these two kind of totally different underlying paradigms of how to approach problems, whether health problems or environmental problems or food production problems or whatever. One that is all about technology and sort of thinks that they can do better than nature, and we use chemicals and we use computer systems and artificial intelligence, and you know, we can do so much better than nature, and is kind of at odds and fighting against nature. And then there's another way that is about working with and optimizing and mimicking nature and so on. We can conceptualize this, like, I almost think that we need to have a science off. We need to have like a competition to actually sort out which of these two philosophies, which of these two paradigms that underlie how we approach doing the science is the best. So like, what I mean is, we do like a randomized controlled study, basically comparing big agriculture methods to regenerative farming methods. We do a randomized controlled study of sending 1,000 cardiovascular disease patients to conventional doctors who give them statins and heart surgery, and we send 1,000 to and blood pressure medications and whatever else, antidiuretics or diuretic medications, so on. And we send another 1,000 to natural health functional medicine doctors who are working on nutrition and lifestyle. And we get definitive answers to these questions as far as which is the better approach to how to do science, what actually leads to better results. Because as I see it right now, all of that stuff, that whole spectrum of these radically divergent, almost opposite approaches to science is all being lumped under the banner of science. And it's like, and each side thinks that they follow the science, quote unquote. I think we need to have a death match and settle this once and for all.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And yet, you know, especially over the last year, I mean, yes, I have been a practicing naturopath for almost 21 years now. And so I'm pretty well versed in the health side of things and the way things work, in the realm of like the impact of the pharmaceutical industry and the health insurance industry on how medicine is practiced. And but I've learned a lot more recently about how, again, the same patterns can be seen in agriculture and environmental science and things like that. And unfortunately, I think the underlying drive behind these approaches that are being used in these industries is greed, and to a lesser extent, power. And unfortunately, also they've already gotten to the point where there's so much money involved that happy to participate in and see the type of death match that you're talking about. I can't imagine it happening at this point. My viewpoint goes back to now more that quote from Buckminster Fuller, or whatever his name is. That's basically like, if you have a problem, if you see a problem in a system, it's not going to work so well to fight against it. You have to build a parallel system that eventually gets so undeniably more effective and appropriate that it makes the other one obsolete. Mm-hmm. And so while I would love to have all of these studies and things that you talked about, because I know the outcomes, I know what they would be. Yeah. I've seen too much evidence that those things are either never going to happen, or if and when small versions of them do happen, as you know, they're quickly buried and don't see the light of day, at least in the realm of the public. And so it's a snowballed system that's just rolling like harder and faster than ever right now. And so my opinion is, in order to overcome that and really show what the better approach to things would be, is it has to be done as a separate parallel system that becomes undeniably effective and is helping more people. And to some extent, people are trying to do that. It's just such a small scale still. I don't know how it's gonna. I don't harbor a lot of unfortunately a lot of hope for these things these days. I always maintain hope. I'm a glass half full person, but I don't really necessarily see the way it's happening until I guess when I listen to people like Zach Bush, I get pretty enthusiastic because he seems pretty certain that there's a way to do this type of approach. But I would take either one, the death match or the parallel system that just makes the other one obsolete.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think one of the challenges to creating the parallel system that makes the original one obsolete is that the kind of paradigm that you and I espouse is multifactorial, is based on systems thinking. And the original paradigm is almost always presented as single factor. It's like reductionistically, myopically focused on one thing. So you have this disease, Alzheimer's disease, you take this pill for it, or like, it's like single disease, single cause, single pill, cure. So Alzheimer's disease is caused by beta amyloid plaques in the brain. So you take a pill that combats beta amyloid plaques in the brain. Heart disease is caused by these plaques that build up in the arteries. And the problem is cholesterol. So you take a statin drug and that fixes your cholesterol, and so on. Depression is caused by too low of serotonin in the brain. So you take a pill that fixes your serotonin in your brain, right? And that kind of thinking is much easier for most people to wrap their heads around. And especially, I don't mean to sound, this is a bit rude to say, but the fact is that the general population of the world is in general not particularly high IQ. There's a big gap between the masses of people and, you know, the segment of the population that is highly educated and has a background in science, for example, or just high education in general, and has the IQ capacity to actually understand complex ideas and systems thinking. So what I mean by this is, like, to go back to that death match, let's say you compared big agriculture, chemical dominant methods with a regenerative agriculture approach. On the one hand, let's say you did that study and you found the big agriculture method was 10% more productive in producing soy and corn, right? And so someone could say, okay, well, the results clearly show that big agriculture methods produce 10% more, therefore they're the winner. But now you add these extra layers to this discussion, like, okay, well, what about the topsoil? What was the result of how much topsoil was left in the big agriculture method versus regenerative agriculture? And then you start to see, oh, the big agriculture method is depleting topsoil, which over time makes the land unfarmable. And what if you then start to see that all those chemicals that are being dumped in to replace the depletion of minerals in the soil, all the fertilizers, all the chemical herbicides and pesticides, are not only causing problems on that land, but are running off into rivers and lakes and oceans where they're wreaking havoc on wildlife and causing, for example, bleaching and die-off of coral reefs and disrupting ocean ecosystems. And what if you start to look at the residues of those chemicals on human health, and you start to realize, oh, they're making humans infertile, and they're leading to they're contributing to all kinds of diseases, cancer, and numerous other diseases in humans. Once you expand out, so I guess what I'm saying is, depending on how you look at that comparison, you could look at it and say, big agriculture is the clear winner. They had 10% more production of soy and corn compared to regenerative agriculture. But then once you have the capacity to look at all of these layers of the entire network, all the nodes of the network, this entire big picture system of the world environment, animal health, human health, you start to see very quickly that actually regenerative agriculture is far and away the winner, because it's not creating any of those negative effects on all of those other aspects of the system. So there's a lens problem too, how we're looking at these kinds of things.
Yeah, and when you say that, it makes me think, well, what you'd want to make sure is that when we design this death match, I love that term. When we design this death match, we don't allow a corporate influenced and corporate biased deathmatch designer to be influencing how the parameters are set up. Because very similarly, when you look at a number of different types of research studies, what the results are oftentimes essentially predetermined by the setup of the study design. And I think you said it perfectly, and it really, I mean, it is literally, while we're talking about a fictitious event, it's played out on the largest scale right now. I mean, all we have to do is mention the term 95% effective, and I know you know what I'm talking in the realm of these vaccines and how effective they are or not for preventing COVID or the severity of COVID or whatever. But you see the same thing in nutrition studies done all the time. You see the same things done in pharmaceutical studies. You see the same thing done in studies that have been done to evaluate pharmaceutical treatments for COVID. You set it up correctly, you're going to get a certain result, and it's typically not usually if you do a study design that is meant to evaluate all the ramifications like you described, that's when you can't really hide the true result. But people that are way smarter than me already know that. And so, these days I'm not really afraid to say, because I've seen it too many times already, that I think a lot of times studies are set up very, very purposefully. And so I would want you to design the death match parameters, not somebody supported by Big Ag.
Yeah, well, to that point, I'll cite a specific statistic that I have cited previously, and it's from Ben Goldacre, who is the author of Bad Pharma, and he's written a lot about bad science. He's an MD. He's also got a couple TED Talks, which I highly recommend everybody watch. And one of the stats that he cites in his books and in the TED Talk is that studies that are conducted by pharmaceutical companies are 400% more likely to arrive at a positive result than the same exact study of the same exact thing done by independent researchers. And I mean, if you just let that simple thing marinate into your brain, why is that? Why would that be? And it's exactly for the reason that you just said, is they know how to set things up, or they just manipulate the data outright, but they know how to set the studies up in advance to achieve the result that they want it to achieve. And they do it quite successfully. They've mastered the art of conducting science, quote unquote, in a way that reliably leads to getting the answer that they want to get.
Yep. If you really thoroughly and very specifically look through a pinhole, you're going to see everything that pinhole allows you to see. Mm-hmm. But it might not show you, everything that's going on outside of that. But yeah, and that's the way that they're not actually being corrupt or deceitful or outright lying. They're just showing you what the results are based on, what they're looking for. So unfortunately, and you mentioned, the average person's not necessarily adept at evaluating all of these things. I know it took me a long time to figure out how to look at these things. They typically look at headlines. They don't have the time or energy or whatever to dig into, well, what did that study actually show? I mean, I know in my case, if I see a headline come out, I immediately click on the article and look to see if they link the study. And then I go look at the study, but not the average person's not doing that. And so, it's, again, they're not lying. They're just telling you what the results are, but people don't realize that they're meant to show that, so I remember, I don't know, just about a year ago, I started doing that for some of the studies that were looking at drugs to treat COVID. And I even made a little video about it because I was shocked at what I found. I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about it, but the study designs were like mind blowing. I mean, just as a simple example, if you're looking for the efficacy of a drug to treat a viral infection, and the placebo you choose is vitamin C. Yeah. That's a bit of a strange study design, unless, and again, if people don't realize already, all placebo-controlled studies are looking for is efficacy of the drug in question relative to placebo. Mm-hmm. So if
a placebo is supposed to be an inert substance.
Inert, right? So if you see a clear difference between the two, then you can say it performed better than placebo. But if they look about the same, you can just say, oh, no better than placebo. And the average scientist doctor who's also skimming headlines is like, see, I told you that drug didn't work. Right. But it's like, well, if it didn't work, but it was compared to something that works really well, that's not the best way to evaluate. And I saw a number of cases of that type of study design being done.
And specifically, just to spell this out for people, these are studies being done with the intention of finding no effect, finding no benefit. So people, in other words, and this is something we talked about in a podcast that I released
couple of weeks ago with Matthew Crawford, who has dug into amazing depth on hydroxychloroquine. And
these were hydroxychloroquine studies that I'm talking about. I don't know if we should mention the name because
Yeah, I don't. Who knows if they're going to censor it based on that they mentioned.
Right.
Basically, it is almost a certainty because it's hard to imagine any other reason for this, any other plausible explanation, that certain interests set about to do science, quote unquote, with the explicit intention to find no effect, to find that certain things were not effective in treating COVID, with very specific intentions. For example, the emergency use authorization of the vaccines dependent upon there being no available effective treatments for that condition. So you can just those two pieces alone, you can immediately see that, hey, there's a clear and massive financial incentive on the order of tens of billions of dollars per year to create science that shows that there are no available effective treatments for COVID, because that allows you to make lots and lots of money. So of course, if you have that kind of financial incentive, would you want to spend a few $1,000,000 here and there to finance some studies that prove that there are no available effective treatments? Probably. If all you're concerned with is money and greed, then you can see how people would very easily be motivated to do that kind of thing. But
yeah, and let's be even nicer. Let's say they do feel that the vaccines are going to be effective and save lives as well. So if you have an opportunity to save lives or save the same amount of lives and make a ton of money on top of it, why would you want it any other way?
Yeah. Especially
if you have a treatment that you can continually modify and change each year, which you can't do to these unpatented drugs and so on and so forth.
Which have no real opportunity for making money. So talk to me about ivermectin. This is a subject that you know a hell of a lot more than I do about, because you've really followed the literature on it. And you've also done some really interesting analyses of the data and statistics on efficacy and absolute and relative risk reductions and things like that. So talk to me about the data on ivermectin, which is another compound that's been around for a long time. I give it to my dog every month. Most people do. It's in the heartworm medication. It's a very common, very safe drug that's been around for a long time, anti-parasitic drug. And there's been, 50 some studies on ivermectin around the world in regard to treating COVID?
I think around that many well-done studies, yeah. I don't profess to be an expert at it. I was familiar with this drug for a long time, just in my work, sometimes treating people with parasites, et cetera, but didn't know a ton about it until starting to try to look into it in the realm of COVID. So let's see here. I think the most important thing I would say is it's highly provocative in the sense that we've seen enough, if we really are willing to look, to warrant at least as thorough of an evaluation of its efficacy as any of the vaccines, for sure, because it looks incredible. I mean, it's already proven to be incredibly safe. And, there hasn't admittedly been a study done on it that's as large as the studies that have been done on the vaccines. But there's been some pretty high quality studies done on it. And one in particular looked at it for prophylaxis in healthcare workers, frontline healthcare workers who were treating COVID. So about as high risk of a population of people as you could ask for. Certainly more high risk than the populations of people evaluated initially or that are in the midst of being evaluated for the vaccination. So in terms of I hesitate still to speak about it as though we have clear comparative research. My interest in it is in its potential and its safety, and in the case studies and things like that we've seen with it. And I post about it all the time. I say all the time, I would be much less inclined to promote it or to promote a further investigation of it if we saw no reason to look past the vaccines. And yet, I know you know this, if you look at the reports coming in pretty much on a daily or weekly basis about severe side effects from these vaccines, and to be clear, we're talking reports, nothing proven definitively, but reports about people's experiences after getting the vaccine. I consider there to be a great amount of evidence to evaluate for the potential of something that might be safer. So just to put it into perspective, I think there's been, since its creation, there's been about 4 billion doses of ivermectin given out to human beings. And I believe it was less than 20 deaths ever reported in the multiple years that it's been in use. And they were all in people that were taking it to treat a very specific parasite condition. And it's known now in the literature that treating people with high amounts of this parasite with ivermectin can cause severe die-off effects. And that's what actually is being attributed, like the severe side effects are being attributed to. So the average person, though, the side effect window is somewhere between fatigue, headaches, and vomiting for like a day or two if you take the drug. And if you look at the side effect window of the vaccines, at least in the reporting system, we're talking from fatigue to death and everything in between. So in my opinion, why wouldn't we want to know if there's something safer? And we both know that ivermectin is not patented and it was off patent. There's no money to be made from it, relatively. And again, if it was proven as a definitive option for COVID for either prophylaxis or treatment, it would make any emergency use authorization vaccine null. So, the writing's on the wall, in my opinion. It's becoming more and more obvious. And the thing that's interesting with ivermectin is there's a large enough group of doctors out there that are pushing for its use that it's almost like the industry's arm is being twisted. And so now they're starting to do new studies. And the one that I just saw being put together, to me, falls into that classic category of study design and whether or not are we going to actually see efficacy. And in all likelihood, we won't. It's too detailed to go into, but it's a study design. It would be hard to see like a really clear signal of efficacy the way that they design the study. And I don't doubt for a second that when it's done, they're going to come out and say, see, it doesn't work very well. But anyways, you did ask about the absolute risk and relative risk. And I think that's an important part of this whole discussion because I did a pretty thorough evaluation. So there was one study with ivermectin where they looked at frontline healthcare workers and they gave, I believe it was about 400 people in each group, so placebo group and a treatment group, ivermectin. And it was there's an important number there's an important term called NNT, or the number needed to treat. And what that is it's evaluating how many people need to take the drug in question, the drug being studied, for one person to experience the positive effect that you're looking for. So the lower the number, the more effective the drug. So an NNT of 1 would mean that every single person that took that drug got the effect that you were looking for. And typically in the realm of drug research, a good NNT is considered less than about 10 to 15. And anything beyond 10 or 15, and the higher it goes beyond that, the less and less effective that drug is considered to be. long story short, in the evaluation that I looked at with this research study done on ivermectin, the NNT was 11. So essentially saying, you know, for every 11 people that took that drug, one person didn't get COVID or a severe case of COVID. And then I looked at sorry, go ahead.
What's considered a good NNT?
Typically, depending on who you ask, somewhere between less than 15 or less than 10. A super effective drug would be like 5 or less. So 11 is clearly considered, you know, effective. But the interesting thing is I also then took the trial data from the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines and calculated what the NNT for those treatments are. And they were 170 and 176 respectively. So that's what people don't hear. So in other words, 170 to 176 people need to take the shot for one case of COVID to be prevented that otherwise wouldn't have. And that's that brings up this whole idea of absolute versus relative risk. Relative risk is essentially saying, like, to make it more simple, if you have, you know, 100 people in the treatment group and 100 people in the placebo group, and 2 people in the placebo group get the illness, and 1 person in the treatment group gets the illness, you can say that that's a relatively 100% effective because there was twice as many people in the placebo group that got the illness. But it's only 1% difference in absolute risk, because 1 out of 100 got it in one group and 2 out of 100 got it in the other group. And that part's never spoken about. So that's why in both the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine trials, they're both considered around 95% effective. That's what most of us hear ad nauseum in the mainstream media. That is a relative risk reduction. So in both groups, in both studies, both vaccines, both the placebo and the treatment group, the overall risk of people getting COVID was super low. And it was like a tiny blip higher risk in the placebo group than in the treatment group. But the relative reduction was significant, which is fine, you know. So this is the big point that to me is, if this was a totally safe treatment that we're talking about, and there was no risk of death or Bell's palsy or some neurological condition or clotting or whatever it is that's starting to come out in the news, cool, give it to 170 people if one person's preventive.
If I can just interject one thing, there was an article just published in sciencemag.org that is titled, if anybody wants to look it up, it's called "Hard Choices Emerge as Link Between AstraZeneca Vaccine and Rare Clotting Disorder Becomes Clearer." And they said what was a worrisome suspicion 4 weeks ago is now widely accepted. The AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine can, in very rare cases, cause a disorder characterized by dangerous blood clots and low platelet counts. By the way, there was a doctor in Miami who famously died of this. There's many other reports coming out of about these platelet issues. And then they go on to say, in Europe, at least 222 suspected cases have been reported among the people vaccinated so far, and more than 30 of them have died. So anyway, just wanted to interject.
I don't know if you saw that just today, they just, in the United States, they're doing a pause on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine for the exact same reason.
Right.
Which I find fascinating because if you look again at the vaccine, the official vaccine reporting system, and you read the reports from Moderna and Pfizer vaccine side effects, you see descriptions of people having clotting issues happen within a short period of time after the vaccine that are identical to the cases that we hear about in the AstraZeneca vaccine and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And yet it's essentially like nobody's listening or nobody's, and you know, I can't imagine that it's not for any reason other than it's rolling out at such a high speed. It's going to take an unquestionable severe situation going on for them to stop this train from moving this quickly. That's my personal opinion. But one thing that's inarguable is you are seeing the same exact side effects. And it makes perfect sense, because when we're talking about the mechanism underlying the vaccine, in all likelihood, what's prompting the reaction that's occurring in AstraZeneca vaccine and likely occurring in Johnson & Johnson and potentially occurring in the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, it's all related to the spike protein. So the vaccines themselves have different ways of getting the spike protein in front of your immune system, but it's the spike protein itself that can contribute to the mechanism underlying the clotting. So there's no reason to think theoretically that there would be any difference. And then we're also seeing cases that show that they're having similar side effects. So, going back real quick to the trials and trial data and all that type of thing, my whole issue with the way that the results are being reported, it has to do with things like this. If there was no risk for something serious like this, and there's only benefit to be had, like every 170 people that got the vaccine, one life was saved, with no potential for a life being lost by giving the vaccine, I wouldn't argue with that at all. My concern is that it doesn't appear that way. And it also happens to appear that there's a drug sitting on the side waiting for its chance, and by the name of ivermectin, that's not being given a full place at the table to be evaluated as a potential treatment, even though the safety record is impeccable. And it could, at the very least, it could, if you look at the NNT, it may work literally 10 plus times better than the vaccines. Not only is it potentially equivalent and safer, it could actually work better. So that's why I keep banging on that subject, because it's just like, I know why it makes sense when you're thinking about the pharmaceutical industry and all the stuff we talked about, but it's just still, I can't get past it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one other layer to this that I think is important. I think there's a fallacy of thinking right now, especially given that we've had these reports of 95% effective and things of that nature, 97% effective. We are, first of all, now seeing thousands of what they're calling breakthrough cases across the US of people who who are fully vaccinated and who still get COVID, and who are in some cases still hospitalized and so on. So there's a fallacy of thinking around that people think if I get the vaccine, then I don't get COVID. So I can trade the risks of the vaccine for the risks of COVID. And also there's the dominant thinking is, of course, vaccines are perfectly safe and effective. The science is in, vaccines are safe. Anybody who dares to say that they might have side effects must be some kind of crazy anti-vaxxer conspiracy theorist. That's the dominant sort of zeitgeist of the culture, that you have to, if you even broach that topic, you risk being viciously attacked, right? So, and unfortunately, pharmaceutical companies have been very effective in creating that culture and in infecting the masses with that kind of thinking. Whereas, of course, everybody knows with drugs and with every other category of substance, of course, there are risks and benefits that have to be weighed very carefully. Nobody would look at the creation of a new blood pressure drug and just be like, oh yeah, of course it's safe and effective. Like, we don't need any long-term data. Let's just give it to hundreds of millions of people. Let's put it in the water supply. What could go wrong, right? Nobody thinks that way, but everybody thinks that way with vaccines for some reason. And there's a real error, like cognitive issue of not being able to think clearly about this particular category of substance in the same way that we would think about every other substance, doing the same exact thing to any other substance in existence to hundreds of millions of healthy asymptomatic people. Before you ever give anything to hundreds of millions of healthy asymptomatic people, you better be damn sure that there are no serious side effects, and you better have a lot of long-term safety data that spans multiple years before you do something like that. But in the category of vaccines, again, everybody sees that as a huge exception. I also want to speak to, again, this fallacy of substituting the risk for the vaccine for the risk of COVID. The fact that we're already seeing these breakthrough cases, but I also want to cite a specific study. This was published in the New England Journal of Medicine recently. It was looking at this AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the same one that now we know has clear risks as far as causing these rare blood clotting disorders, which can either permanently disable you or kill you. And what they did was they enrolled about 1,000 people in the vaccine arm and 1,000 people in the placebo arm. And this will also be good, by the way, to demonstrate absolute versus relative risk reduction. So in the 1,000 people in each group, they looked at the efficacy of this vaccine to prevent COVID with specifically the South African variant of COVID. And what they found is in 1,000 people who got the placebo, 32 people got COVID. And of 1,000 people who got the vaccine, 25 people got COVID. So 25 out of 1,000 versus 32 out of 1,000. Okay, now you can technically say the relative risk reduction, the effectiveness of the vaccine was 20-something%, right? Which implies that it had some efficacy. But of course, anybody who looks at those numbers and understands statistics can see that, hey, there's really no effect whatsoever here. This is a tiny difference between these two groups, which means the vaccine basically didn't work at all. So it is likely, and that's one variant that's already in circulation around in many places in the world. So again, I'm just trying to point out this fallacy that many people have of, if I go get this vaccine, then I don't have the risks of COVID. When in reality, at least in some cases with some vaccines and some variants, the risk, the efficacy may be greatly reduced, like almost to the point of zero in this case. And in this case, you're not trading risk of vaccine for risk of COVID. You're adding the risk of the vaccine to the risk of COVID. You're actually creating an additional risk. And
that's a great way of putting it.
That I'm afraid far too people really understand clearly.
Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. The other thing that made me think about is that, at least in some situations, another thing that's done behind the scenes that people aren't aware of is there's sometimes a difference in the level of health between the people selected in the placebo group versus the people selected in the vaccine group. And so that calls into question this whole idea of like, okay, if out of 1,000 people, 25 people got it or 32 people got it, what was going on with those other 900 plus people in either of those groups, and why didn't they get it at all in either situation? And nobody looks at those things, and what is keeping 99.7% of people from dying of COVID in the entire world, because those things aren't treatments. Mm-hmm. Those are everything else that we do in our lives and our health and age and all of these different things. And so if there's so many different things that we could bring up to evaluate these studies and show how many parts of it don't speak to the efficacy that they're being touted to have. And not only that, like if you just read mainstream media, they have frequently been called miracles, to go from calling something a miracle to looking at it from the perspective that we're talking about, it's like night and day difference, and people. So, the average person out there is sitting here thinking this is the greatest thing that's ever happened in human history. And it's such a strange world that we're in, that people can be thinking all the way from that perspective to the perspective that we're talking about, and everything in between. It's just, I oftentimes say, I wish I was just sitting on a couch with some alien out in universe somewhere watching this show, because it's a fascinating one to watch it play out. Yeah. Such interesting times.
Yeah. So on that note, I want to actually transition into some practical suggestions that you might have for people during this period of time. You posted a couple times recently a kind of hierarchy of thinking about, you know, what treatments to use and how to best improve and optimize one's health. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the link between health, metabolic health more broadly, and risk of COVID, and what practical suggestions that you have for people to improve their health or think about how they should reduce their risk?
Yeah, so the first part you talked about, there is something in naturopathic medicine that we call the therapeutic hierarchy of treatment, or the therapeutic order of treatment. Something I learned about in my first week of naturopathic treatment philosophy. And the thing I love about it is that it's all inclusive. It doesn't exclude any treatment, all the way up to the most invasive, potentially harmful, side effect ridden drug or treatment that you could think of. It's all on the spectrum. And unfortunately, you know, if you look at Wikipedia to determine what you do or don't think about naturopathic medicine or any of these related health professions, you would think that we are out there with signs telling people not to ever take drugs, not to ever take a vaccine in any situation, not to, you know, to not use chemotherapy, even if you're dying, whatever, you know. And it's not like that at all. It's really more about when do you put these treatments into action relative to what else you're doing. And admittedly, sometimes the situation is severe enough that you have to put more than one step into play at the same time to save somebody's life. So even if, but the point is you should never put a more aggressive step in without also including a less aggressive, more foundationally supportive measure. So a classic example that I wish someday might actually come true is like if somebody shows up even at an ER dying of you know, bacterial pneumonia, while they're simultaneously put on IV antibiotics, they should sure as heck be put on IV vitamin C, which would be a more fundamental way of supporting the body's health, function, immune system, et cetera. And it's not to say that they shouldn't be put on the antibiotic, but if that's all you're doing, you're missing an entire category of ways to help this person get healthier. That might get them to that place more quickly. It might be more effective. It might even save their life when otherwise they might die in spite of the bacterial infection. So point being, the therapeutic hierarchy is essentially like it's like a pyramid where the foundation of things are all the things that you, I'm sure, have talked about tons on this podcast about how to support your health from the most fundamental things you can do in terms of being in nature, breathing fresh air, drinking clean water, eating good quality food, sleeping, getting appropriate light exposure, all of these different things that are going to help every single human being, no matter what their situation is, at least to some degree. And then as you move up this ladder, so to speak, or this pyramid to the very top, the top would be the most invasive, harmful treatments that are available in medicine. And again, sometimes they may be necessary. Sometimes even experimental treatments whose safety records and efficacy records haven't even been determined yet might be appropriate to place right at the tippy top of that. But by no means should we do that, you know, without doing anything else. And in my opinion, COVID is shining a light, a bright spotlight on the sort of inappropriate way that we approach health in the Western world, which is, you know, the most classic example. And I'm gonna leave the brand name off, but if you have a donut company promoting vaccinations and by giving free donuts, you have a broken healthcare system that is not considering the foundations of health at all, and is simply going right to the tippy top of the most, you know, technologically advanced, potentially harmful treatment that you can get, and not only not considering the base, but literally working against the base of health to try to get people healthy and make them feel safe and like they're no longer vulnerable to an infection, which is ludicrous in my mind. But you could apply that to all kinds of different chronic health issues. Obviously, if somebody comes in with a broken leg that needs some type of surgical post implanted in their leg to put it back together, that's highly invasive and potentially harmful, but they need it right then and there. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. But when we're talking about metabolic health and, you know, the clear, definitive, inarguable risks for severe cases of COVID that have been shown repeatedly in studies, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, etc. You know, the last study I saw shows that just between those three health conditions, you have a 66% increased risk of COVID. So we have a vaccine that may potentially be killing unfortunately, some people out there for reasons we don't know yet. That's 90-ish% effective. And we have things that we can do in our lives that are at least 60-something% effective. That the only side effects of which are you also won't get a heart attack as easily. You probably won't get dementia as easily. Osteoporosis, cancer, you name it. Those are your side effects from doing these other things and working at the foundations of health.
And that goes back to, kind of the beginning of this conversation. We're talking about whether you zoom in myopically on something and focus only on that thing, and then you ignore all the other consequences from the other layers. And in this case, when you work with nature in this way, for example, using nutrition and lifestyle measures to actually improve the overall health status of that organism, of the human, you not only reduce the risk of this one disease, and instead of having a bunch of side effects of increased risk of other things, you have reduced risk of every other major disease that could possibly kill you: cardiovascular disease, neurological disease, cancer, diabetes, and so on. So this is a fundamental distinction, I think, just kind of looping it back into what we were talking about earlier.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, I totally understand why somebody is attracted to the idea of a vaccination helping them not die of COVID, because that's a shot in your arm versus changing your life and doing all of these other things. And it's not meant to, neither of us are saying this from this perspective, like, well, all you got to do is flip a switch and not have diabetes anymore. We both know it's not that easy. My problem is, and I'm sure the problem that you have, is that the messaging out there in terms of how we're going to fight this virus and prevent deaths and severe illness from this virus that we see from the TV doctors and scientists and these organizations out there that are telling us everything we should do, it's never mentioned.
Yes.
Like these things are never mentioned. And so it's in my opinion, it's negligent to not at least bring that into the discussion, let alone allowing like donut companies to promote, I've seen a beer company also, you get free beer if you get your vaccine. It's just like, it speaks to how broken our view of health is and preventive health is. So it's really just literally asking for a place at the table for these things. Well, and then individualized out into every individual situation.
Yeah. And imagine how much progress could have been made had public messaging on mainstream media, everywhere you look, been focused on how big of a factor these obesity and other poor metabolic conditions associated with poor metabolic health are linked with increased susceptibility for COVID. And like, imagine if taxpayer money, if these government bailouts went to fund, apps on everybody's phone that taught people basic nutrition, that got people exercising, that taught people sleep hygiene, that taught people stress reduction. We know that stress reduction, we know that stress, we know that being sedentary, we know that poor nutrition are all linked with decreased immune function profoundly. And like we could have made so much progress had we invested in ways that educated the public and actually made those things more accessible for them. Here's a subscription to a home workout service that's all body weight based, so you don't need any gym equipment, right? And I know you posted on this recently, but I just want to illustrate the level of how counterproductive things have been, because not only have public health experts not advised people to do those things actively, but the measures that the messaging that they have gotten out there has had so many of the exact opposite effects. People are lonelier than ever. People are, binge eating on junk food and doing much more emotional eating than ever. Mental health problems are skyrocketing. And then you posted some stats recently, I'm pretty sure, on like the amount of weight gain that has happened in the American public over the last.
The running joke. Yeah, the running joke is they're calling it the COVID-15. But the study that I posted about showed that the median weight gain in the last year was 28 pounds.
Wow.
So, I mean, and that is not muscle. And so undoubtedly you're getting it. I mean, that's the thing that's so, also frustrating, is that none of these things are even questionable. It's definitively proven that a reduction in metabolic health and a reduction in sleep and a reduction in mood and all of these things, they all worsen immune system function. It takes 5 seconds to find a study that supports that. So it's like this huge way that we could, and I think you gave some great examples of ways that we could actually have done things differently over the course of the year. That if people were told your number one, like imagine if people were told your number one thing to prevent dying from COVID is to do this, this, and this, that would be like the greatest advertisement for healthy lifestyle ever created, and the most effective one, because people are freaked out, understandably.
Yeah.
And it was the opposite. 0, nothing from anybody almost ever that you see. So it's a tragedy. We had such an opportunity to really speak to people in a way that they've never really been talked to before, and to really show them how much power they have in that's the other thing that I've been saying since day one, is people don't realize how much control they have over this. They are left to feel like they have no control, and the only option that they have is to wait in line and get their shot and cover up and hide from a virus that you cannot hide from until that time.
Yeah.
So it's just that, again, these are the things that get me upset and want to talk to people about this, because nobody else is talking about it. And it's such an unfortunate thing that's happened, and just provides further evidence of how broken everything is, and how it's, not about the well-being of the average individual.
Yeah. Well, imagine if you could quantify the amount of lives lost as a result of that median weight gain in the population of 28 pounds.
Yeah.
And imagine if you could quantify, if we had done public messaging actively from all of our public health authorities, all of our media, and provided some of those solutions to people free of charge, to get to use the fear of what's going on as a catalyst for nutrition and lifestyle change. And imagine if the reverse were true. Imagine if the average weight loss in the population was 28 pounds, and we could quantify how many lives that directly saved from people not dying from COVID that otherwise would have. Like, this is the kind of analysis that I think would be so just incredibly helpful for helping people really get the connections here.
100%. I mean, so again, a very good way of, not surprisingly, you're putting it in a very good way. Like that makes perfect sense, and it would be way more than 1 in every 175 people. That's for sure. And what would the side effect be? Again, you'd prevent the top 2 killers in the country. You'd make a significant dent in preventing cancer and cardiovascular disease, diabetes. I just think I had the funny thought of like, what if every time anybody ever saw the word mask, they saw the word broccoli? Like, it would be in our subconscious at this point. I got to eat my broccoli. Just that's a bit of a joke, but I got to eat whatever, or go for a 30-minute walk. Every single time we see masks, we see go outside and go for a 30-minute walk. Everybody would be doing, most people would be doing. And then the other interesting way to think about it is there'd probably be a lot less people fighting against, who's going to say, me choosing to eat broccoli and go for a walk is infringing on my freedoms. Probably not very many people. And we could go on and on. There's so many different ways and different things to think about how this could have been done differently. And then, I try my best to not come up with the worst case scenario thinking. So why it is the way it is, but it is really hard to look at. I mean, I like to think, pretty smart couple of guys talking about all this, but like, we're not the top scientists that are out there thinking through all this. It's so obvious. And it's just, I can't help myself but to think that there's other things that are influencing this that don't have anything to do with my well-being.
Yeah.
And
it's
just what it is.
Understand some of these things that we've just talked about. Then you ask the simple question, well, why haven't our public health experts done these things that are so obvious and have, to the point of the kind of risk versus benefit analyses of various treatments that you were talking about earlier? These are things that have essentially zero risk, and not only zero risk, but actually have proven benefits in myriad ways for all kinds of health conditions, and can benefit this condition simultaneously. So zero risk, huge potential for benefit. What is the compelling argument against doing this? And why haven't our public health authorities been doing this? And if you ask that question, it's hard to imagine that the answer is just ignorance and incompetence, right? Like there has to be.
There's no way.
Ignorance.
There's no way.
Yeah. So, we'll leave it up to the listener to.
I will speak. Sorry. One thing I will say. I mentioned broccoli. I think it's a super important point to also make that there are many people out there in the United States, at least, who, if they knew what broccoli was and what it looked like, they wouldn't know where to get it. And if they did go to the store and find it, it would cost 5 times as much as the $1 cheeseburger that they were being offered on every other street corner. So there's a fundamental problem in our country in the realm of access and knowledge and understanding of these things that also would have to be put into action. But everybody knows how to walk if they can. So there are still, even if because I have seen pushback on posts that I've made about, like, if we just lived healthier or took vitamin D or whatever it is, some people that are highly tuned into the sort of problems of in our country in terms of access to these health promoting activities or whatever. I've been called out on that, and it's a good point, but it's not an excuse. There are still ways, either by making these things more available. I mean, if we can make warp speed happen and, pour billions of dollars into these vaccines and, look at how quickly they've been developed and all that stuff, we can do anything. If we can shut the entire world down, we can do anything. So there's no excuse,
100%. And what about, to that point, what about things like, essentially like handing out food stamps to the country, but food stamps that only allow you to purchase produce, for example? Or what about, as I said before, giving access to free apps and educational technologies that educate people on the importance of sleep hygiene and circadian rhythm optimization for immune function, that educate people on the basics of good nutrition, that educate people, that give people access to like full daily workout regimens for free. Like all of those things could have easily been done.
And it takes 1 minute to think of them.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not that they haven't been thought of.
Yes. My last question to you, and thank you for sticking around for a fun discussion for so long.
Yeah.
Is if you were going to leave people with one single piece of advice or one core idea or one practical recommendation to do right now, what would be your number one tip for people?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot.
If you want, if one is too much pressure.
Well, I mean, you can keep it a single thing that's very broad, and it's get out and be in nature. I just spent 5 days in Eastern Oregon, hiking around different parts of these incredible places, and being in the fresh air, sunshine, etc. I think I did a post not too long ago where I was just basically like asking a silly question. What if there was a place that we could go to where everything around us supported our health just by being in it?
Yeah.
And there is, so, and typically if you're out in nature, you end up moving, so obviously we could get into details about eating and so on and so forth, but I love the information that you have out there in terms of light exposure and sunlight exposure and sleep hygiene, so it's essentially like just be human, and do what humans are meant to do. And, as much as you can in your life that's unfortunately now set up to be as inhuman as we could ever have imagined. Everything that we do is not really what's natural to us. So just any effort to do things that are natural for you is going to be beneficial to you. It makes me, there are a few things that are more painful to me than going on a hike in a beautiful natural setting, in a forest with all these trees emitting all the amazing things that they emit into the air, and to see a child with a mask on walking through there. It's like tragic. It's truly like tragic that they are literally missing out on some of the most health promoting things that they can do based on a broken system. It's like the quintessential example of, and every time I see it, it's like this little dagger in my heart of just this quintessential example of how broken things are, how unaware and uninformed people are as to what they could be doing versus what they are doing.
Yeah.
So
well said, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a lot of fun to have this discussion with you, and allow it to unfold organically. I think neither of us knew exactly what we talked about, but
I wasn't scared. I was ready for you.
So again, I just want to let everybody know about the Healing Earth Health Conference that's coming up on, what did you say, April 24th?
Yeah, that's Saturday after Earth Day. Yeah.
Okay. And give us the quick 30-second pitch for that. What's it all about? Why should people go and watch it?
Well, this is actually the second annual one. It's renamed, but the whole idea is that the writing is on the wall. We are not going in a good direction on this planet. And, if you listen to the right people, you'll find that we might not have very much time left. And yet there are ways that we can change our lives fundamentally that might be able to stop this train and or at least start steering it in a different direction. And so our goal is to bring as high level of speakers as we can on to talk about the different ways that we need to start thinking about how to live in a way that's going to help promote life on this planet and promote the well-being of everybody, everything, and the planet itself.
Beautiful. And the website is earthheal.org, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Earthheal.org.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to follow me on Facebook, it's just my name, Daniel Chang.
Okay, perfect. Daniel, thank you so much. Really, this has been a lot of fun. I hope we can do it again in the near future.
Yeah. Pleasure.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Thank you again.
Thank you. Hey there, this is Ari again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, if you found it valuable, please share it with your friends, share it with your family, help me get the word out there. Also, if you're on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to get notifications every time we release a new video or new episode of the podcast. And if you're listening to this, make sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for supporting my work at the Energy Blueprint. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you in the next